On Thanksgiving Day, what was supposed to be a warm, family-filled celebration quickly turned into a moment of stark isolation for Rachel. She arrived at her sister Melissa's house, her two young children in tow, hoping for the kind of holiday warmth that most families shared. But as soon as they entered, Rachel felt an unsettling chill in the air. There was no excitement, no welcoming smiles, just an awkward silence that hung between them. Melissa's forced smile only deepened Rachel's unease as she led them through the house to the back garage, saying in an overly cheerful tone, "I've set up a place for you all. It's quiet, just like you like it." Rachel felt her chest tighten as they walked through the dimly lit garage. The cold air was almost suffocating, and the room itself was sparse. There was a flimsy folding table with 3 plastic chairs, a few leftover side dishes shoved into mismatched containers, all of it clearly taken from the main dinner inside. The laughter and clinking glasses from the dining room filtered in, a stark contrast to the stillness and coldness of the garage. She could hear the warmth, the comfort, the togetherness just beyond the door, but here she stood, on the fringes, shoved into the shadows, as if they didn't belong. The pain didn't come from the meager meal or the uncomfortable chairs, but from the look in her daughter's eyes. Her young face was a mix of confusion and quiet hurt, though she tried to mask it with a forced smile. Rachel could see her daughter trying to hold it together, trying not to show how deeply she felt the sting of exclusion. Rachel's heart broke as she realized that this wasn't just about her own feelings of abandonment, her children were now experiencing it too. Her mind raced, a whirlwind of emotions, betrayal, sadness, and a growing sense of helplessness. The weight of the situation pressed down on her chest, but she couldn't let it show. She had to be strong for her children, even as everything inside her screamed to lash out, to demand more, to fight for a place at the table that was rightfully theirs. Rachel sat at the small kitchen table, the plate in front of her growing colder by the minute. Her fork barely touched the food, her mind too preoccupied to care about the meal that was supposed to bring comfort. The room around her was filled with the faint sounds of laughter, clinking glasses, and idle chatter, but it all felt distant, like a muffled background noise that only emphasized how alone she truly felt. Melissa's voice rose above the others, a little too loud, a little too eager, as if she were trying to fill the silence with something, anything, that could mask the tension in the room. It worked for everyone else, but not for Rachel. The weight of isolation pressed down on her, suffocating her in a way that felt too familiar. It wasn't supposed to be like this. This wasn't what she had imagined when she first walked through the door. She had come, hoping for a chance to mend the rift, to bring some sense of normalcy back to their fractured relationship. But instead, she felt more like an outsider than ever. The table was set for a gathering that wasn't really for her. Everyone was in their own world, chatting, laughing, and sharing moments that Rachel wasn't invited into. Her presence was tolerated, not welcomed. The thought stung, and her chest tightened in a way that had nothing to do with the meal in front of her. Her daughter, Lily, sat across from her, twisting her small hands nervously on the edge of her seat. Rachel could see her daughter's discomfort, the way she fidgeted and looked toward the door as though she, too, felt the distance between them and the rest of the family. It wasn't just Rachel who was affected, Lily, too, could sense that something was wrong. Rachel's heart ached at the sight of her daughter's innocent confusion. How do I explain this to her? She thought. How do I explain that we don't belong here anymore? Her son, Jonah, sat beside Lily, trying to play with his food, but his eyes kept darting toward the dining room, where the conversation seemed to swirl around him. He didn't ask questions yet, but Rachel knew they would come. He would want to know why they were sitting out here alone, why the others seemed to forget about them, why the family, once so tight-knit, had become so fragmented. She had no answers. No easy explanation. It was too complex, too painful to simplify. All Rachel could do was hope that, somehow, they would understand the silence. The absence of warmth was its own message, a truth they would inevitably have to face. But she wasn't ready for them to ask just yet. Rachel's fingers tightened around her glass, her knuckles going white. The tears that had been threatening to spill for hours suddenly felt too close to the surface. She blinked rapidly, but the lump in her throat was impossible to ignore. The familiar sting of rejection, of being pushed to the edges of her own family, burned through her chest. Why am I even here? She asked herself. What's the point of trying to fix something that can't be fixed? The anger and hurt were simmering just beneath the surface, but she refused to let it show. She wouldn't let them see her break. Not here. Not now. Her gaze shifted to her children. They were hers. They were all that mattered in this moment. Despite the quiet chaos that threatened to unravel everything, Rachel had to hold it together. She had to be strong for them, even if it meant sitting in silence, even if it meant pretending that everything was okay when it clearly wasn't. She could already feel the weight of the questions that would come later. Jonah would ask, and Lily would wonder, but she didn't have answers for them. Not yet. A soft, almost involuntary sigh escaped her lips. She reached across the table and gently grasped Lily's hand, offering her the only comfort she could give in that moment, a simple touch, a silent promise. Lily's small fingers closed around hers, the warmth from her little hand sending a rush of relief through Rachel's chest. It wasn't much, but it was enough to steady her for a moment longer. The door to the dining room creaked open, and for a moment, Rachel tensed, expecting someone to come in, to make some sort of comment about the strange silence between them. But no one came. The noise from the other room grew louder, more distant. The family was still celebrating, still enjoying the time together, while Rachel and her children were left to quietly endure. But Rachel knew she couldn't just leave. She couldn't run away, no matter how tempting the thought was. If I leave now, she thought, what will that say to them? What will that teach my kids about family, about fighting for what matters? So, she stayed. She stayed for them, for Lily and Jonah, even if the house felt colder, even if the love she had once shared with these people seemed to slip further away. She would endure, for them. And in the silence of the kitchen, surrounded by the fading echoes of her family's celebration, she found a strange, quiet strength in that resolve. Perhaps this, too, was a part of their journey, part of the painful truth they would have to navigate together. The heavy silence of the dining room seemed to press down on Rachel, suffocating her in a way that no words could. She could hear the soft clinking of utensils, the faint murmur of distant conversations, but it felt as though the world outside her immediate bubble had faded away. The tension in the air was palpable, a gnawing feeling that settled deep in her stomach. She hadn't touched her food, her appetite long gone. Her mind was too busy, racing through the countless thoughts that had plagued her ever since she had walked through that door. She cast a glance toward the hallway where her parents had retreated, the muffled sound of their voices growing quieter as the seconds passed. They were still there, still avoiding her, still holding on to their own comfortable distance. Her chest tightened. The rift between them was not new, but tonight, it felt as though the distance had grown immeasurable, more insurmountable than it had ever been. What was once a strained but functional relationship now felt like an old, rotting bridge, barely holding up under the weight of everything unspoken. She couldn't help but wonder, why was it always this way? Jonah's voice, small and tentative, pulled her from her spiraling thoughts. Mom, why don't they talk to us? The question hung in the air, simple yet devastating. It was a question Rachel had long feared. It was the question that spoke to the heart of everything, the growing distance between her and her family, the emotional gap that had been widening for years. The weight of it settled heavily on her shoulders. She turned to face her son, his wide eyes full of innocence, confusion, and perhaps a touch of hurt. Her heart clenched as she saw the flicker of doubt in his gaze. Lily, sitting across from Jonah, was silent, but her eyes darted back and forth between Rachel and her brother. The unspoken questions hung in the air, but at least Lily hadn't yet asked them. Not yet. Rachel could see it in her eyes, though, a deep curiosity about the growing chasm between them and the rest of the family. The way the adults laughed, joked, and whispered in the other room as if they didn't have two small children right in front of them. She could see it in Lily's posture, the way her shoulders were slumped, as though she was carrying the same weight Rachel had been carrying for so many years. Rachel's throat tightened. She wasn't sure how to answer. The truth felt too heavy for these small, innocent hearts. How could she explain the endless disappointments, the years of trying and failing, the missed calls, the ignored texts, the painful silences? How do I explain this to them? She didn't want her children to feel the weight of her own unresolved grief, but she couldn't lie to them, not completely. With a shaky breath, Rachel straightened herself, her hand instinctively reaching for the edge of her wine glass, though she didn't lift it. Her fingers curled around the stem, a small, subconscious act of comfort in a moment when she needed it most. She looked at Jonah, his expectant eyes still fixed on her, waiting for an answer that she wasn't sure she had. She glanced down at her lap, where her hands were folded tightly together. Focus. Just focus on them. Not on you. Not on the mess inside your head. Just them. They're just busy, sweetheart, Rachel said, her voice barely above a whisper. The words felt like a lie, thin and fragile. She could feel the tension creeping into her shoulders, the tightness in her chest threatening to undo her calm exterior. She forced a smile, though it felt hollow. You know how people can be when they're busy talking to everyone else. Sometimes they don't notice that other people need them too. Jonah's brow furrowed, and he didn't look convinced. He turned his eyes down to his plate, his small fingers tracing the rim of his glass. Rachel swallowed hard, her mind racing. She wanted to say more, to tell him that it wasn't his fault, that he and Lily were loved beyond measure. But she wasn't sure if she believed it anymore. She wasn't sure if she could convince herself, let alone her children. Then Lily spoke. Her voice was small but carried a weight far beyond her years. Do you think they love us, Mom? The question was simple, yet it cut through Rachel like a razor. Her breath caught in her throat. She hadn't expected Lily to ask it out loud, not yet. She had hoped that somehow, she could shield them from that kind of pain for just a little longer. But there it was, do you think they love us? It wasn't just a question about the present. It was a question about everything, about family, about connection, about love itself. Rachel closed her eyes for a brief moment, letting the question settle into the pit of her stomach. She knew the answer wasn't as simple as saying yes, but she didn't know how to explain it to them. How could she possibly put into words the complexities of a family that had fractured over the years? How could she explain that sometimes, love wasn't enough to bridge the chasm created by years of pain and resentment? She opened her eyes and turned her gaze back to her daughter, who was staring at her with wide, trusting eyes. Rachel's heart ached. How could she make Lily understand that she was loved, that they were loved? She forced a smile, her chest tightening as the weight of it all became too much. Of course they do, honey, she said softly, the words almost foreign on her tongue. People just have different ways of showing it. Sometimes they get caught up in their own stuff, and they forget, but it doesn't mean they don't love you. Lily didn't seem convinced, but she nodded anyway, her gaze drifting toward the table. The silence in the room stretched long and painful, like a chord that had been played too long. Rachel could feel the quiet weight of her own brokenness pressing down on her, but she knew she had to keep going. She had to keep pretending, if not for herself, then for them. Jonah was still quiet, his small fingers curling into the fabric of his shirt. His eyes were downcast, but there was a flicker of understanding in them that Rachel couldn't fully grasp. The innocence was slowly beginning to fade, replaced by something else, a quiet awareness of the gaps in their family. Rachel glanced at the door to the dining room once more, where her parents still lingered. They hadn't made any effort to reach out to the children. She didn't know how much longer she could keep pretending everything was fine, but she couldn't let them see her unravel. Not yet. Not now. With a deep breath, she placed a hand gently on Jonah's arm, giving him a reassuring squeeze, though it didn't quite reach her heart. "We'll be okay," she whispered, her voice thick with the weight of emotions she was too afraid to acknowledge. She wasn't sure if she believed it. But she had to. For them, for Lily and Jonah, she had to find a way to make them believe it too. The silence stretched between them like a chasm, filled with unspoken thoughts and unasked questions. Rachel sat at the worn kitchen table, her fingers tightly clutching the edge, knuckles white with the effort to hold herself together. Every muscle in her body was taut, as though one wrong move would unravel the fragile thread of composure she had left. Her children sat across from her, their faces a mixture of concern and confusion, searching her expression for any hint of reassurance. But all Rachel could offer was a strained smile, one that didn't quite reach her eyes, and a heart that felt too heavy to carry. Jonah, ever the quiet one, had stopped fidgeting with his toy. His small hands rested in his lap, his gaze fixed on the table, but his eyes flickered up to Rachel every so often, as though hoping to catch a glimpse of the mother who had always been his safe place. She could see the way he was struggling to understand, the way his innocent mind was trying to make sense of the storm that had quietly raged in their family for so long. His uncertainty tugged at her heart. Lily, however, had always been perceptive beyond her years. She sat with her arms crossed over her chest, her brow furrowed in quiet thought. She wasn't looking for an answer, she was searching for the truth. Rachel could feel it in the weight of her daughter's gaze, the intensity of the silent question Lily had been carrying for so long. She had always been the one to ask the hard questions, to dig at the things Rachel was so desperately trying to keep buried. "Mom," Lily's voice was soft, but it cut through the quiet like a knife. Rachel's chest tightened, the knot in her stomach growing with the dread of what was to come. She didn't want to answer this question, didn't want to say the words that had been lingering on her lips for too long. But she knew she had no choice. The truth had a way of finding its way out, no matter how tightly it was locked away. "Do you still love them?" Lily asked, her voice steady but full of the weight of something much deeper than her years. "Even after everything? After all the years of silence? Do you still love Grandma and Grandpa?" The question hung in the air, heavy and raw, and Rachel felt as if the world had stopped turning. She hadn't realized how much she had buried that part of her until now, how much she had pushed aside in order to keep moving forward, to keep her family intact. But now, with Lily's question, it all rushed back, every moment of hurt, every unspoken word, every silent night spent wondering if her parents would ever reach out, ever try to bridge the gap that had grown between them. I don't know," Rachel whispered, the words slipping out before she could stop them. She squeezed her eyes shut, her fingers digging into the wood of the table as if it could anchor her to the present, stop her from sinking into the past. Her voice faltered. "I don't know if I can love them the way I once did. I want to. I really do. But the hurt, the distance, it changes things." Lily was quiet for a moment, processing her mother's words with an understanding that felt too much for someone so young. She uncrossed her arms and leaned forward slightly, her eyes never leaving Rachel's. There was no judgment in her gaze, just an unspoken recognition that Rachel was fighting something bigger than herself. But still, the question lingered between them, the weight of the answer pulling at Rachel's heart. Jonah finally spoke, his voice small, almost lost in the quiet of the room. "Does that mean we're not going to see them again?" he asked, his lips trembling with the uncertainty that had been building up inside him. The words were simple, but they cut deep. Rachel could hear the fear in his voice, the fear that the world as he knew it, of family gatherings and visits to Grandma's house, was slipping away. Rachel swallowed hard, the lump in her throat growing with every passing second. She wanted to reach out and hold him, to promise him that everything would be okay, but she couldn't bring herself to make that promise, not when she didn't know if it was true. "I don't know, sweetie," she said softly, her voice cracking with the emotion she had been holding back for so long. "I don't know if we'll see them again. I don't know if they'll ever be able to see us, not the way we need them to." Jonah's lip quivered, and Rachel felt a sharp stab of guilt in her chest. He didn't deserve this, neither of them did. She hadn't meant for them to be caught in the middle of this, hadn't meant for them to bear the weight of a fractured family. Lily reached over and placed her hand gently over Jonah's, offering him the kind of comfort Rachel couldn't quite provide in that moment. It was a small gesture, but it was enough to break through the tension in the room, to remind Rachel that her children, despite everything, still had each other. They still had the love that existed between them, and maybe that was enough for now. Rachel took a shaky breath and wiped away the tears that had started to form in her eyes. She couldn't afford to break down, not in front of them, not now. They needed her to be strong, to guide them through this mess, even if she didn't have all the answers. "We'll figure it out," Rachel said, the words coming out with more conviction than she felt. "We'll find our way. But for now, we have each other. That's enough, isn't it?" Lily nodded, her expression softening. Jonah, though still unsure, seemed to find comfort in the simple reassurance. The three of them sat there for a moment longer, the weight of the conversation lingering in the air, but with a faint sense of calm settling over them. Rachel's heart still ached, still felt fractured by the past and the uncertainty of the future, but as she looked at her children, she knew one thing for certain: no matter what happened with her parents, no matter how fractured her own relationship with them had become, she had a new family to protect. A family that, for all their uncertainty, still believed in her. And that belief was enough to keep her going. The days that followed felt like they were suspended in time, as if everything had come to a quiet halt. Rachel couldn't quite shake the feeling of heaviness in the air. The house, once filled with the usual chaos of family life, now felt still, unnaturally so. Jonah and Lily had started retreating into themselves. Lily, who usually bubbled with energy, now spoke less, her gaze often lost somewhere in the distance. Jonah, on the other hand, had become unusually quiet, his eyes brimming with thoughts he never seemed to voice. Despite Rachel's attempts to ease the tension with little distractions, baking together, long walks to the park, the kind of activities that usually brought them close, she couldn't ignore the weight that hung over them all. It was as though their bond had been stretched thin by unspoken words, truths left buried beneath the surface. Rachel herself felt adrift. She had never been one to avoid confrontation or sweep things under the rug. But this was different. The past she had long tried to outrun was knocking louder than ever, and she couldn't ignore it any longer. She knew she had to face it, not only for herself, but for her children. The thought of Jonah and Lily struggling with the same unanswered questions, the same confusion she had felt for years, filled her with a sense of guilt she couldn't shake. They needed answers. They deserved them. But how could she give them answers when she was still trying to piece together her own story? Each night after the kids went to bed, Rachel would sit at the kitchen table, staring into her half-drunk cup of tea, her mind spiraling. The house, once bustling with the sounds of daily life, felt so eerily silent. The faint hum of the refrigerator, the rustle of a breeze against the curtains. It all felt too loud, too quiet at the same time. Her hands, which should have been comforted by the rhythm of everyday tasks, trembled slightly as she cleaned the dishes, folding towels, and setting things right. She didn't feel the comfort she used to find in those small routines. The unease that had started as a whisper had now become a constant presence in the back of her mind, gnawing at her. One night, as she sat there, the phone rang, shattering the stillness. Her pulse quickened as she saw the caller ID, Mom. Rachel stared at the screen, a thousand thoughts racing through her. The last time she had spoken to her mother, really spoken to her, had been years ago. That conversation had ended with harsh words, wounds left unhealed. Rachel had made the decision to walk away, to shield herself from the pain of their broken relationship. Yet, here it was, the same name flashing on the screen, a name that carried with it a weight of memories she had spent so many years trying to bury. She wanted to ignore it. She could pretend she hadn't seen it, let it ring out and fade into the night like any other call. But she couldn't bring herself to. Not tonight. Not when the question Lily had asked her earlier was still echoing in her mind, "Why don't you talk to Grandma anymore?" Rachel's heart pounded in her chest, each beat heavy with the weight of that question. Could she really ignore it any longer? Could she really continue to shelter her children from the truth that had shaped so much of her life? She closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the familiar sting of unresolved pain in her chest. But then, with a shaky breath, she answered. "Hello?" The voice on the other end was soft, hesitant, and unmistakably her mother's. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence felt suffocating, thick with all the things they had never said to each other. Finally, her mother's voice broke through the quiet, carrying with it an unexpected vulnerability. "Rachel, it's me." Her mother's words seemed to hang in the air, and for a moment, Rachel could only process the enormity of what that simple sentence meant. Her mother, the woman who had once been her everything, who had turned away from her without a word of explanation, was calling her. After all this time. After all the years of distance and anger. "I know," Rachel said, her voice barely above a whisper. It was all she could manage, her throat tight, a lump forming there as she tried to keep herself steady. The words felt foreign, uncomfortable on her tongue. "I know it's been a long time." The silence stretched again. Her mother sighed deeply, and Rachel could hear the weight of the years in it. "I've thought about you, about us, more than I can say. I regret what happened. I know I hurt you, Rachel. And I'm so sorry." Rachel's heart squeezed painfully in her chest. She had spent so many years building walls around herself, telling herself that she didn't need her mother, that she didn't want her in her life anymore. But hearing this, hearing the regret in her mother's voice, made those walls feel suddenly fragile, as if they could crumble at any moment. "I don't know what to say," Rachel replied, her voice quivering. "I don't know if I can just go back to what we were. There's so much between us." "I understand," her mother said, her tone gentle yet firm, as though she, too, had been waiting for this moment for a long time. "I don't expect everything to be fixed right away. But I'm willing to try. I'm willing to listen. I just want to find a way back to you, Rachel. Even if it's one step at a time." Rachel exhaled shakily, her breath escaping in a cloud. It wasn't what she had expected. She had anticipated anger, defensiveness, but not this. Not this quiet admission of guilt, this willingness to meet her halfway. A part of her wanted to reach out, to let go of the years of hurt and let herself believe that something could change. But another part of her, one that was far more cautious, was afraid. Afraid of what it would mean to open this door, to allow herself to trust again. "I don't know what that looks like," Rachel said slowly, carefully. "But maybe we can try." Her mother's response was immediate, a breath of relief that echoed down the line. "Thank you. That's all I can ask for." The conversation ended not with finality, but with a quiet sense of something tentative, something fragile. Rachel knew that nothing had been resolved, not really. But the first crack in the wall had been made, and maybe, just maybe, it was a start. For the first time in a long time, Rachel felt the heavy weight in her chest begin to lift just a little. She didn't know where this would lead, or what it would take to heal the years of hurt between them, but for the first time in a long time, she felt like it was possible. There was room for forgiveness, even if it was only a small sliver. And maybe that was enough for now.